Hello guys and welcome to today's live interview. I'm here with Nick Bradley, who is a business coach and scale-up specialist. Just to give you a bit of a very, very brief background on Nick, and some of these stats may blow your mind, but he's enabled 22 business acquisitions. He's completed over $5.3 billion in deals across 8 business sectors in 11 countries. But he's also completed 67 marathons and 24 ultra marathons worldwide. He's got a #1 podcast in the world with over 100,000 downloads in the first 12 months of launching. And he's had guests on his podcast like Neil Patel and David Meltzer. Amazing to have you here, Nick. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, it's awesome to be here, Seb. Thank you very much for having me.
And how has your week been so far?
Well, considering it's Monday for me, sure. It's busy already. But I think that's symptomatic of kind of all the stuff that's going on with COVID in the world these days, and people are starting to get restless about their businesses, needing more help, needing more advice around things. So yeah, it's been cool.
Are you starting to see things pick up a bit since things are sort of normalizing slightly?
Yeah, I'm just seeing people start to be more confident with what they were thinking about with their businesses, where there was a point of, I suppose, people kind of getting overwhelmed and having the kind of fear and uncertainty that you expect when something like a global pandemic hits. That's starting to lift now because people are starting to realize they can't sort of sit in hibernation and expect things to change. So they're starting to get in contact with us now to start talking about their strategy and how they can start to drive growth much faster.
Yeah, totally. So I mean, looking at this bio, I've spoken to a few people about it today, and I know there's a lot of excited people to hear not just about the ultra marathons, but also, how does someone get to that stage where they're completing over $5.3 billion in deals? And could you take us back to the young Nick, growing up as a young Nick? What was life like?
Yeah, okay. So I'll go back a bit actually, because I grew up in a little place called Adelaide, South Australia. And I kid you not, it's famous for about 2 or 3 things. One of them is big sharks, the other one is churches, and then the last one is serial killers. I've got no personal...
And you didn't fit the bill for any of those, really?
I don't fit any of that. I used to surf a lot, so I probably got close to the sharks a couple of times, but that's about it. And yeah, so I kind of, I grew up there, and I started my first business when I was 18, which was a sort of fitness personal training business. And this is back in sort of early 90s when personal training wasn't even a thing back then. It was something like only really rich people could get access to. So started that business, sold that business when I was 22, and I moved to Sydney, and I used to work for Men's Health magazine and kind of got into the Rupert Murdoch empire, which we'll kind of get into a little bit later today, of course, and worked my way into the world of corporate in sort of magazines and that. And then I got to move to the UK as part of that. And I spent sort of 15, 20 years working in sort of global media businesses, doing lots of M&A, lots of kind of strategic growth and all that sort of thing. So it's been quite a ride and really good fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds amazing. So something that stuck out to me then was you sold your first business at 22. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that obviously was the first of many business sales, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I started that business. There's a little bit of a pre-story which I'll give you. And as a youngster, I was incredibly overweight. In fact, what I look like now, the weight I am now, I was something like 20 kilograms heavier when I was in my sort of late sort of 9, 10 sort of years. So I had to go through this pretty big sort of transformation in my earlier days. And part of that was obviously all around health and fitness. And the 2 things really to kind of take away from that story. One is transforming yourself at any time in your life is a big thing, right? You've got to kind of get right down into the grid of who you are and kind of work out what you want and take action, make it happen. And I did that. And then I sort of thought, well, actually, I'm so passionate about the health and fitness industry, I'm going to just go and start something because I felt like I was bulletproof. So I started this business, ended up having about 30 odd clients. I was doing about sort of 30 to 40 hours of personal training per week. I employed 3 staff. And I sold that business to a mate of mine, literally for a bit of money, nothing crazy, but enough for me to then pack up and move to Sydney and kind of get into a bigger pond, so to speak. Right. So yeah, that was the backstory of that. It was good fun.
Yeah, definitely, really interesting. So that move, how old were you when you were 22 when you made that move, right?
Yeah, 22. I went there with a little bit of cash, not heaps. I mean, at the end of the day, I wasn't probably as commercial around that sort of stuff as I am now. I just kind of wanted to get over there as a youngster and sort of play in that game. But Yeah, I ended up through networks and connections. So one of
Yeah.
my personal training clients happened to be good mates with Rupert Murdoch,
Right.
strangely. And that managed to get me a meeting with a guy called Matt Hambry, which was like this uber wealthy dude in Sydney.
Yeah.
And that was my kind of foray into the world of publishing.
Okay, cool. Okay, so you network through your clients
I did.
to build your network and kind of sort of tap into a whole different audience, really. And
Yeah.
that's when things started to change for you slightly.
Yeah, the whole, if I look back, it's funny when you reflect on these things. Like, people say your network is your net worth. And that's been true for me all through my career. All opportunities that have presented themselves have been through connections and being kind of true and authentic in those kind of connections with people.
Yeah.
And if I look back serendipitously, all the different doors that have opened have been by being able to step into those type of networks and being able to use them effectively.
Yeah. You hear that so often. I mean, when you were building these connections, you were out there giving value, right? So it wasn't like you were taking, you were giving.
Oh yeah, it was all about that. I mean,
Yeah.
if I think about it in hindsight, it was the introductions that I got, particularly in that kind of first few years of moving into that sort of world of corporate and bigger business, were because I'd added so much value for 3 or 4 years before that to people kind of in their personal lives. So they felt that they wanted to do the same back to me. So that's a great life lesson that just anyway, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's almost like a hidden ROI to going above and beyond sometimes.
Yeah, I think
There's
sometimes
little
people
things.
focus on the wrong
Sorry?
thing. I think people focus on the wrong thing sometimes. They focus on the fact that it's about me and it's about
Yeah.
what I can get. And the problem is that when you show up like that, it's very obvious to everyone else, and no one likes to be around that. So if you genuinely show up in a state of contribution, like I'm here to make a difference to you, to help you, it's amazing how that reciprocates in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose it's like delaying that instant gratification, isn't it? It's not necessarily about getting what you want straight away. There's a process, and if you can have a long-term view of these things, ultimately you will benefit from, down the line eventually.
Yeah, and it does take a little bit of confidence to be able to believe that. And I think some people kind of miss it because what's that famous saying said where, you plant the tree and you don't expect to see. So you plant the seed, you don't expect to see the tree the next day. It can take,
Yeah, yeah.
diligent watering and sun and all that crazy stuff. But it's so true because like a lot of the stuff that's happened when we kind of get into kind of the, I suppose the acquisitions and the M&A side of things, they've been longer term partnerships that have taken time to grow. But once they've grown really quickly and they've been transformational.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I look back probably on a smaller scale at some of the relationships, that I've got business relationships now, and they've stemmed from conversations 5 to 8 years to 10 years ago. Do you know what I mean? And it's only much later on down the line where you obviously know, like, and trust someone. You've got a deeper insight into their character, what they're like, their values, and yeah, there's that deeper connection, isn't there?
There is. And yeah, it's like people buy from people they like, right? It's always been like that. And therefore, if you think it's anything different than that, then you kind of miss out. So, I have a policy about just not being a dick or even working with them. Sorry for the
I like
language.
that. We'll turn that into a quote picture. I like that. We're big on repurposing content here, so
I know you are. I know anything I say here is going to end up on TikTok in about 5 seconds time. So there you go.
It's already on TikTok. What do you mean? So okay, cool. So what was the next step? So guide me along this journey after this.
Yeah, so I landed in Sydney, and I was, as I said to you, bulletproof is a pretty apt expression of what I felt like, because I kind of transformed myself into being kind of super fit. I had started a personal training business that was successful, and I kind of thought nothing could fail, really. So I kind of got into the world of corporate, and I was pretty arrogant and aggressive with my whole kind of early career. And there's a massive pivot I'll get to later on. But basically, I kind of went into the world of corporate. I was board director of a large company before I was 30. Got the opportunity to move to the UK, came over here, did the same thing, ended up being a regional board director. Then I moved to New York for a year, worked for a company called Getty Images, and I ran one of their business units, which was just under $100 million in revenue. And came back to the UK, and then I ended up kind of working in the world of private equity as a chief exec and a guy who was known for going into businesses that weren't performing and turning them around. But I'll go back a step because, as I said, when I was going through that early career piece and I said I was quite arrogant and not a very nice person to be around, back to what we sort of started talking around about contribution and helping others. back then, for me, it was very much like, all about me, about how much money I could make, what sort of car I could drive, size of house, all about being, significant, having a reputation for being this kind of big hitter.
Yeah.
And I found that after a while, that started to kind of really make me super stressed. And I wasn't a very nice person to be around at home, the family, and all those sort of things. So I ended up going through a bit of a kind of turning point, and that sort of pivoted me towards a lot of the stuff that I do now.
So you weren't too keen on the personality that you were that you were showing at that time. You kind of grew into this person, probably because of the amount of pressure and stress put on you in the first place. But it was a side of you weren't too keen on, and you wanted to make a change. What was the, you mentioned there was a turning point. Was there one sort of pivotal moment where you kind of realized you wanted to make a change?
Well, I kept getting sacked.
You kept getting sacked.
I embellish a little bit. It wasn't. There's a point, I think, in every entrepreneur's life where, and some people get it really early, where they realize that they're unemployable.
Yeah.
And you just don't want to put up with crap all the time, or you're sitting around a room full of people who the whole agenda is nothing to do with where the company can go.
Yeah.
And I kind of got to that space at a point in my career where I thought, you know what, I can't do this anymore. But what happened at the same time, Seb, it's interesting. So I was doing a big deal in one of my corporate kind of roles. And I started to get really, really stressed about the deal because I just didn't feel like it was me. It didn't feel congruent with my values or any of my beliefs. And I remember going to bed one evening. I wasn't feeling great. I was stressed. I was not being a great dad for my two girls, all that sort of stuff. And I went to sleep. And I remember waking up at 3 a.m. and literally the whole side of my face was swollen and like throbbing with pain. It was like I'd been smashed, like literally punched in the face. And I couldn't get back to sleep. And I went to the doctor in the morning and he said, listen, you've got to go to the dentist because what you've done is it looks like you've cracked all the teeth in the right side of your jaw. Wow. And I went to the dentist and they said I had. What had happened is I went to sleep and for about 5 hours, I literally must have clenched so tight that I'd broken some of the teeth towards the back here.
From stress?
From stress.
God,
yeah.
That's a wake-up call, isn't it?
Oh, man, it was awesome. Yeah. Like, it wasn't awesome at the time. Yeah. But everything changed. And what I did is that I'd made some money and all those sort of things, but I wasn't really happy in what I was doing. So my wife said to me, she was super supportive. She said, listen, you've got to change this. You need to find who you are again because you've lost who you are. So I called up a mate, and he's a guy who retired in his late 20s. He sold his company for $60 million. And he was, really. He was one of the first investors in Love Film, which is now Amazon Prime.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, but he was always a bit of a crazy dude at university. He was this guy that like never came out drinking and playing pool with us, and was always a little bit kind of out there into personal development and all this sort of stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and
in the long run, he was busy planting the seeds while everyone else was.
But this is what he said, right? This is the piece, right? So he said to me, he said, you know what? He said, get yourself to a Tony Robbins event. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, that's just crazy crap. I'm not doing that at all. But like, you know, when a guy who's retired and lives on a Greek island says that to you, you kind of think, well, actually, perhaps there's some points behind this. And I'd read some of his books and I had done a bit of personal development around mindset and things before. Yeah. But again, long story short, I looked at when the next event was on. It was about 3 weeks away from my teeth incident in Chicago.
Yeah.
My wife said, get on a plane. And I went there and literally for 3 or 4 days, I went through this kind of like reflecting on all the decisions I'd made in my corporate career. Realized that actually I was really just a frustrated entrepreneur back in my sort of late teens, early 20s, and realized that I needed to take all the skills and all the things that I'd learned through private equity and selling businesses and doing deals and take that into my own world and try and help people more with that as opposed to just being about me or just trying to make cash.
Yeah. Wow. Right. So looking back at that very difficult, painful moment, you know, do you feel a sense of gratitude for that?
I mean, everything. I've got this really strange epiphany that happened, like that I'm super, super excited about and grateful for, which is certain things in life happen to you, and at the time you think they're terrible, but actually they serve you ultimately, depending on the perspective. And I had a number of different points before the teeth thing happened over the course of maybe 5 years that were all pointing me in a certain direction, like I was off path. And all I needed to do was trust the fact that I needed to trust myself and then get back on a path.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. And that's a few years ago now. But I tell you what, the difference between who I was and who I am now and what I'm contributing to the world and all those sort of things, and also to myself, my family, is totally different.
Amazing. That's really cool. I know a lot of people who have really enjoyed Tony's stuff. You know, it's very loud and it's a bit clappy and well, how else can you explain it?
I used to say it's very American, but then all of my American
it's very American, but you know, there's probably quite a few Americans watching this, Nick, and now they're just tuning off. So,
oh, I love America. Everyone knows that. Love all of my American friends and colleagues. Love you all.
That's it. No, but it is, isn't it? And you know, but he's got a lot. There's a lot of people who have had some really pivotal moments. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
from his workshops, from his events.
It was one thing, right? And I think there's a certain theatre, right, that happens when you go to one of these events that you don't get if you read a book or watch a video. And that's all part about states, you know, certain sort of emotional states that you're in. But the thing for me was this, right, is I realized that a lot of the decisions that I made up until the point were based on trying to be sort of more significant in the world. So in other words, letting other people kind of see that I was the man for various reasons. And also driven by fear as opposed to anything else. So I needed to have this comfortable corporate job that wasn't serving me and actually wasn't allowing me to express kind of who I wanted to be. And I didn't quite realize that at the time. And the only thing that was stopping me kind of breaking out of that was just how I felt about the situation. So I needed to change that. And once I changed my thinking around that, then everything else opened up.
So this moment of, you know, introspective enlightenment really set you on a path to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and it's funny. As I said, I was always probably a frustrated entrepreneur in my corporate world anyway, and I was doing some really amazing.
You were getting fired too much in your early 20s, and you were the sort of guy when someone said you're fired, you were like, you can't fire me, I quit.
that has been said. Yeah.
I'm my own boss. I don't need you.
No, exactly. And you know, the thing was, though, it sounds really arrogant, right? And people probably listening to this saying, listen to this guy, like, you know, how bad was his life when he had, you know, Porsche in the drive and you know, $1 million house and all that. Okay, woe is Nick. But there is a point here where, like, you know, money's important, and we know we're going to talk about empires and things like that, but it's only important if you kind of really make a bigger contribution in the world.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing that. So I wanted to have both. I wanted to have wealth, freedom, all the things I wanted to do, and I also wanted to make a bigger impact. And that's the change. That's the transition.
I guess that happiness comes from, you know, living closest to your values.
Yeah, and understanding what
it sounds like you were maybe pursuing the things that you thought were your values, but in actual fact, it was more about contribution and impact, right?
Yeah, and the other thing that happened over the time was my father left our family when I was about 2 or 3, and my parents got divorced, and he didn't come back into my life until my early 30s.
Right.
And like what happens sometimes when families break up, there's a bit of character assassination that happens. And so I was hanging out with sort of my mum and all that, and of course my dad was the devil incarnate, and I didn't have anything to judge that by. So when he came back into my life in my 30s, I found out that he was a really successful entrepreneur. He'd started a number of businesses. In fact, he started a few businesses in his 30s, which were in Melbourne, Australia, and there was a Turkish bombing, the consulate bombing, and he lost one of his businesses because it was a gold and jewelry retail business that was right next to the consulate, and there was no insurance at all for this terrorist attack.
Wow.
So he went broke in his like late 30s, early 40s, started another business, and then ended up being a millionaire from his second business, from a full pivot out of this massive place of adversity.
Yeah.
So I kind of met him, and then I thought, well, perhaps this is why I'm thinking like I am as well, because a lot of what was in him was in me, and I was repressing it, whereas I should just kind of enable it and let it happen.
Wow. Really? So when your dad stepped back into your life, that was almost like a second moment for you where you had another sort of pivotal moment, right?
Yeah, all of these different, I suppose, lessons or insights were coming in at various times.
Yeah.
And the other part of the story is, so he came back into my life, and then I was doing all the running, ultra marathons and stuff. And we had this really one intense kind of holiday where we went together, and he was crewing me in this 100-kilometer race in Vermont in the US. And so I did that. It was really great. We had this amazing time in sort of Boston and Cape Cod. Said goodbye, and then the next time I saw him was 9 months later, the day before he died of cancer.
Really?
And so he came back into my life quickly. We had this amazing experience. I kind of got a lot of sort of, at that point it was confusing for me, but it kind of was clarity now. And then he left once he gave me the gift of understanding who I needed to become. So it was pretty powerful.
Wow. This sounds like something from a movie, having such an incredible experience like that.
Yeah, it does when you hear it for the first time, but it's like, like, you know, when you look back in hindsight, you kind of see patterns.
Well, this is what I always say. You can never, it's only when you look back you can join up the dots. Do you know what I mean? And if we, just from speaking to you and learning more about I know we've talked many times before, but never gone into your background this much. But when you kind of look back at all the different things that you've been through in your life, and you step back to those very, very pivotal turning points, and you go back all the way to when you were much younger, and you were overweight, and you went through this process of losing weight and understanding the importance of pushing yourself when you're uncomfortable, which led you into ultra marathons and all these other things, right?
Yeah.
How vital that it was that you were overweight in that moment in order to become the person you needed to become, in order to get through these different things, to learn those character traits, right?
And like, my identity now is very much around health and fitness, because I had to make that change. Once I made that change, it gave me the grit and the belief that I could do anything. And I hadn't really lost that. I just wasn't focusing my energy and everything that I wanted in the right areas. But you're right, a lot of things that happen in your life, they serve you if you look at them that way. At the time, they don't feel like it, but they massively do if you can kind of put some perspective around it.
Yeah, definitely. So now you're in your sort of early 30s. You've been through this other moment, and now you're getting into this stage. Tell us what happened next.
Yeah, so around the time I started working in the world of private equity. So I'm now in my mid-40s, so it's sort of like, I've been sort of in the private equity world for over a decade now. And private equity is an interesting way, because it's for people who don't understand that, it's where you have high net worth investors effectively putting money into a fund where there are other people who go and buy businesses that are undervalued, underleveraged, and they will try and transform those businesses, scale, grow those businesses, sometimes bolt them together with other businesses to get a demonstrable impact and value. So you can make a lot of money from private equity. And the problem with private equity is it's a little bit of that bad rap of building gecko and hedge funds and all that. And to be frank, the culture of it can be like that, changing a lot. But certainly when I was in a decade ago, it was very bullish, really aggressive macho stuff going on. And I quite liked that at the time, because that's where my mindset, my headspace was, particularly around me trying to be significant. And then there was a point where I thought, you know what, I don't really want to play in this world in the same way. So I did that for a while, and then I sort of transitioned into what I do now, which effectively is the same sort of thing, but at this time I tend to side on the side of the entrepreneur and the business leader, and I'm on their side trying to create value and scale in their businesses. So
right now, I mean, scale specialist. Can you give us an example of some projects you worked on in the last few years?
Yeah, I can talk to a few. There's a couple of big ones there where I'll get brought in by, let's say, an entrepreneur, sometimes by the investors themselves. And the whole premise really is the business growing as fast as it possibly can? Has it got the right intangibles in place for it to be effective? And so one of the biggest ones we were involved in over the last sort of 3-4 years was a business based in the US, but had a UK subsidiary. And I went in there and managed to kind of take some costs out, but also increase the commercial flow. So we had something like, what was it, the highest sales month in the company's 27-year history, which we created within 4 months of being in that business. Wow. And that was really about being clear on the proposition, fixing some of the kind of ways that they went to market with sales and marketing, and just being really intentional. But the difference that makes in value, Seb, do something like that is huge.
I mean that's, when you look at paying for quality advice, right? And it's like, it's incredible how just the right advice at the right time can just make that much of a change. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the way I describe it is there's a number of different things that really fast growth companies have.
Yeah.
the kind of like attributes, characteristics. And it's funny when I go through them now with you, kind of go, oh yeah, that's so obvious, that's so obvious. But it's amazing how many businesses, for whatever reason, don't have them. So,
So is it worth us going to this after we dissect, what an empire is, or should we go into it now?
let's go into empire, because I think everyone asked me the question, what the hell's an empire?
So yeah. What?
What the hell's an empire?
When I think of empire, I think of something like Virgin or Coca-Cola or Apple or Amazon or an organization which kind of has multiple streams of income across multiple countries around the world, and it's their brand. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, I mean that is one I suppose definition of it, or one example of it. So if you take something like Virgin and Branson, he has created an empire of multiple businesses, multiple streams of income, multiple customer niches across multiple geographies. So that sort of thing is absolutely one. If you look at Bezos and Amazon, exactly the same thing. But an empire doesn't have to be always that big. So, it's one of my goals that we're working with in our company at the moment is to create our own empire of multiple businesses. So I've got 7 companies at the moment, 10 streams of income, and we want to get that up to 20 in the next 3 years. And the goal over the next 5 years is to have that, enterprise value in the sort of hundreds of millions. Now,
okay, so within that, is it exactly the same team who are involved in every single business?
No, you have, what I say is you have the strategy piece and the investment piece at the core.
Right.
And the operational piece is closer in the business units or the businesses themselves.
So there's kind of like a central HQ business, which basically owns shares in all of these different businesses, and within that central business, it's where the investors and the strategy comes from.
That's right. If you want to have multiple streams of income from having multiple business investments, you can't effectively, let's say you're the person kind of as the owner, right? The owner investor, you haven't got the capacity to be able to be operational in any of those businesses.
Yeah.
So you want to have a really strong person in the business, a general manager or a COO or whatever you want to call it, an MD, and you want to be able to manage those businesses using dashboard spreadsheets and creating the strategy in what we call a 90-day cadence. So you can dip in and dip out, but you've got really good operational teams in the business delivering the strategies and plans.
Yeah.
But back to your definition, so people are clear. An empire can be one business that's got scale. So it can be, you could have one business that's got massive scale, a little bit like the Virgin Empire, but even just having a business which is massive. It can be multiple businesses, multiple streams of income. The definition really is one where there is more scale and more complexity, but there is definitely more upside and excitement depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. So in the way that when you first go about doing this, when you're looking to grow your empire in the early kind of stages, you've probably got a bit of experience in growing your own business. You're probably in that position where you know what it takes to run a successful business, and now you want to expand and have multiple businesses. Do you typically look for something that is very similar to your initial business, or do you just say, look, I can apply this strategy to another field or a completely other industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll kind of answer it by going back a step and then jumping forward. So,
Sure.
First thing to say is being an empire builder, being someone who wants to create an empire, is not for everybody. So that's the first thing. So there'll be people listening to this to go, that sounds really fun, that sounds great, but you've really got to want to do it, because it can be a balls ache as well. So
I can imagine a lot of people listening to saying, this sounds like a nightmare. I've had enough of this industry as it is, let alone another few.
You've got to be passionate about kind of, making a bigger impact, first and foremost.
Yeah.
You've got to have broad shoulders, right, to be able to deal with all the kind of ups and downs. And you've got to like solving complex problems.
Yeah.
Right? Because otherwise,
if you're wondering if you've got the characters to do it, then just sign up to an ultra marathon. And that should give you an insight.
You do have to have something going on up here, probably. Yeah. But you know what? It's massively exciting. It's massively exciting because, as I said, it depends what your view of the world is, right? I get really passionate about solving big problems, right? Making a bigger impact. And I just think you can do that really effectively when you have more scale. And creating an empire is kind of, there's no choice for me, right? That's what I want to do, and that's it. And that's the thing you've got to ask first before you get into it. But to your question, the first thing I always say to people is you start with a focus on one thing. So first and foremost, have a business that is successful in its own right before you even entertain the idea of going empire. And the reason for that is most people kind of make their first degree of wealth, if you like, from focusing on that one thing, getting that one idea really working. Doesn't mean you can't have multiple streams of income, but it means you focus on one entity, one area.
Yeah.
The next place to go is to try and scale out that one area with acquisitions which fit in the same market but create scale within the area that you're already good at. So that might be buying your suppliers or buying your competitors and just creating a bigger entity of what you're already doing. It might be international expansion, that sort of stuff. And then what will happen, though, eventually is you'll find that you just get good at business. You get good at understanding the various characteristics of great businesses. And then you can start to move out to be more of an investor. You'll also have the cash runway to do that. So you can start to then buy businesses which are maybe nothing in your niche or expertise, but that doesn't matter. You just know the fundamentals of how to build a great business, and you can bring all the expertise in as part of the model.
Brilliant. I love that. It reminds me a little bit about, speaking to Daniel Priestley about this a few weeks ago. And it was about how, if you're going to start another business or another venture or even, acquire another business, it can either be a plus or a multiply, right? If it's vastly different to your other business, you got one business going on now. If you buy another business or start another business that's very different, it's like a plus. You've now got two separate businesses. But if you've got one that's very similar to the one you're going to buy, it's like a multiply, because you can kind of piggyback off the success of the other one, and it interlinks, right?
Yeah, and that in the world of private equity, that's how that kind of works, because we used to have the same 1 + 1 = 3, or even 1 + 1 = 10. The point being is it doesn't equal 2. Yeah. And the whole idea of what we call a buy and build is where you have one platform business, one entity, one thing you start with, and then you bolt on all these other bits and pieces, but they give you the multiplier. And in private equity terms, that can sometimes double the value of the business, if not triple it. And so you can make so much money from that. We sold a business called FTEN Learning. I was part of that, and we sold that for 14 times profits.
Wow.
And that was over.
Times.
Yeah, that was 2 billion.
How many different sections are bolted on?
There was 14 businesses.
Wow.
But not all done at once. This is done over maybe sort of 5 to 8 years. Yeah. But the hard part that sometimes is to try and create a story around the 14 businesses. But if you can do that, then you can literally take the multiple up significantly and create a transformational capital event, as we call it.
And looking at this example, were they businesses that were all very similar and they were creating that multiplier effect, or were they businesses that were quite different?
They have complementary features, because what doesn't happen is if you're sort of growing something to sell it, the other person buying it obviously needs to see the value. So if it looks disparate, like they're just all these kind of just a group of companies and they don't work off each other or create what we call any synergy, either the ability to take cost out to be more efficient or the ability to serve a market in a certain way, then there's no real value on the multiplier.
Yeah.
So they have to, when you get really big, they have to have some sequence to them. But if they're very disparate, then the value actually goes backwards. It can be degrading, and the best thing to do then is to break the group up and sell the component parts.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So you're in this position. You've got a business. You're looking to have a bolt-on business to try and to begin building your empire. Where do you search? Where do you go to look for this initial business?
Yeah, so right now is one of the best times set for this, because two things are going on. You've got obviously the COVID piece, which it forces some people to look at their businesses again, and there are people who are, say, retirement age, or they've had their businesses for 30 years and they've either run out of ideas or they just don't want to go through this again, because it just takes effort to be able to kind of get the business back on track. So right now, let's say you've got a successful business in manufacturing or something like that, there's a lot of businesses probably in your manufacturing niche which will be not necessarily advertised for sale, but if you can reach out to people in your network, competitors, and I'll go through how to do that in a sec, then you'd be surprised how quickly you can find deals. And a lot of those deals would be at a good price because of the market conditions.
Right, yeah.
So
yeah, I can imagine a lot of people have been spending the last 10 years getting cashed out ready for this.
Yeah, and the other thing also is a lot of these deals go for quite cheap. So if you've got someone again who's probably retirement age, 60s or 70s, and they've made money from their business for again 20, 30 years, the primary reason for selling is not always money.
Mm.
Usually it's time, because they're thinking,
Yeah.
I just want to now go and sit on the beach and not have to worry about, turning
Yeah.
up every day and running my business. So you can buy a business for 3 to 4 times profit, or sometimes even less. I've done deals where they're basically for zero, and I can explain how to do that. But then if you bolt them together with your business and you have 2 or 3 of these, you could sell your business one day, if it's got scale, for 6 to 10 times or more.
Wow.
So do you see the impact of the multiplier
Yeah.
on that, which is incredible?
Yeah, completely. I mean, timing is vital, right? And just the situation in which you purchase just makes such a big impact. I know a lot of people sort of, I would say 50s to late 60s who have businesses, and exactly like you said, the whole industry is being shaken up. Do they really want to pivot their businesses online? That's almost like restarting a business. The amount of energy and effort and time that would go into that, would be so much. I think they'd be more than happy to sell even at a discount.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said beforehand, you can do deals for little or no money.
Yeah.
It's not easy to do them. I would never want people to think, just go out there and find a deal. But I have seen situations, and we've had one in particular, where someone's just said, I just want someone else to run the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're prepared to kind of give it up as long as they've got a monthly income coming in. So you can pay for the business off over years, like 3 to 5 years, and do it in what we call a seller finance deal. So
Yeah.
therefore, you're not putting any of your own capital in. And that's a no-brainer.
I've heard of this. I've heard of this method in which you basically agree to buy a business, but you pay them back through the profits of the business, which you manage for them.
That's right. Yeah. Every deal has a component of seller finance. It's very rare that these things don't happen in various ways.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing in the small business area is that the percentage of seller financing has gone up because of what's going on in the environment and the market at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot.
Such an interesting topic, isn't it?
There's a lot in it, right? So it's hard to sort of talk about it like we are. There's probably people in the chat here going, "What the hell? This is like alchemy or something." But the reality of it is, right? There are many opportunities in how you grow a business and how you scale a business. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. But trying to do it just organically all the time, is not really the smartest way to do it. You need to build a foundation organically, going after the right customers, right propositions, right sales and marketing. But if you want to get into the empire world, then you are going to start to become more acquisitive and start looking at these more strategic options.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. So right now, are you working on any projects very, very similar to this, or is it mostly your own stuff you're working on, or are you still helping businesses do this?
Yeah, I've got 2 separate parts of what we do. We have our own investments, which is exactly what I was saying there. We look to buy businesses that are under leveraged, and then we come in and we basically apply a methodology of how to scale them up and grow them.
Yeah.
And we apply that same methodology to businesses, as I said before, that aren't growing as fast as the business leader, the entrepreneur would like. And we still do a little bit of work with private equity, whereby they might have some portfolio companies that are not on track, they're caught underwater. And what's really interesting about this step is to go into a portfolio company backed by private equity and try and move it from underwater to being above the value they paid for it. The difference in the price of that, in terms of what we kind of can do, is massive, because the value change is huge. So we can be taking a business from, let's say, worth 5 million, but actually needs to be 30 million. If you can show the pathway to that, that's a huge amount of growth for the private equity firm.
Yeah, totally. Huge change.
Yeah,
huge change. So I mean, in terms of private equity and that sort of stuff, if people wanted to learn more about that, are there any good books or podcasts or things that they can go and listen to or read?
Yeah, the first book I always recommend around leverage buyouts and things like that is a book called Barbarians at the Gate. I'm not quite sure, I can't remember who it's by, but it's about the biggest ever leveraged buyout in history. I think it was for billions. It was the Bisco, I believe. Okay. And that's a really interesting one around this kind of idea of strategic stuff. But then, obviously, I talk about it quite a lot on my podcast as well, Seb. So there's a piece where there's a whole heap of different episodes dedicated to this sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, definitely. What was the name of the podcast again? Scale Up
Your Business. Yeah, so we can link.
I've been listening to a few episodes this week. Brilliant podcast, guys. Scale Up Your Business and check it out. Really, really great. Number one in the UK. 100,000 100,000 downloads in the first
Yeah,
12 months?
it was number 1 in the UK, number 17 in the US. So I didn't quite crack the top 10 there. And
No worries. It's probably because you made so many derogatory comments about the US in the first episode or something.
No, I just said there's a lot of fear for the Tony Robbins event. That's all I said. No one can argue.
In the first sentence, the opening line.
But yes, I mean that's broadly what it is. But I think what's important for people to understand, though, if someone's listening to this right now and they're going, "Oh, where am I? Where's my business?" There are some characteristics which I'll share with the audience, because I think it's important to understand that.
Yeah,
right?
Totally. I mean that would be great to kind of give everyone a bit of an insight into your the way in which you look at a business and analyze it, and what's your methodology for that rapid acceleration.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, after looking at so many different businesses, I mean, the good thing about having the podcast is I've managed to interview some really, really incredibly unbelievable entrepreneurs and business leaders who have done huge scale-ups themselves. I had a guy on the other day whose net worth is $500 million, and he's got like his own empire that he's building. And the good thing about doing podcasts is, it's the conversations you have outside of the recording. So I've got all of that stuff going on. I've worked with literally hundreds of different businesses now on various parts of growth and scale-up. And there's 6 things that I kind of want people to kind of hear, and then they can judge where they're at, so to speak. So the first thing is that businesses that are on this kind of fast growth journey, they always have a compelling destination that they're clear on. So sometimes that's called a vision, and they have a plan to get there. So that's the first thing. A lot of you'd be surprised how many businesses don't really know where they're going, and they haven't got a good enough plan.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first thing that I kind of assess: is it good enough? Then you've got to say, do they have the financial gearing to make that happen? So do they have a cash runway? Do they have enough cash reserves, firstly, to be sustainable, so they're not worrying about any problems? Most of the businesses that we work with are very cash generative, but if they've got a big vision, they may not have the funding to be able to take it to where they want to take it. So the first thing is assessing what they've got to be able to do the first piece of this, but actually how are they going to fund the growth over the next 2 to 3 years to get to something which is transformational.
Yeah.
So that's the second piece. Third one is, do they have what I call a unique solution stack that solves a very clear, quantifiable market problem? And we talk a bit about product ecosystems and things like that, and we have talked about it. But you've got to be able to have something in there which is comes together in a unified way. Hence the reason they call it a stack. That can solve a really, really clear problem. So again, you'd be surprised how many businesses started with that, and then the market's changed. They haven't changed, and all of a sudden they become obsolete.
Yeah, totally. It's all about adapting with the changes, right? Rolling with the punches, and I think that's such a really important. Was it the unique solution stack to solve a problem?
Unique
solution. Basically,
and
your methodology, isn't it? As a business, what is your method?
Changing that. Yeah, so that's that. Then you get into the kind of commercial one. So the next one is having a predictable flow of customers driving recurring revenue. And there's 2 really key words in that: predictable. In other words, don't worry or try and guess where your customers are coming from. Make that a predictable flow. Yeah. And recurring revenue is massively important, so that you're not always trying to just go out there and get deals. So that's key. And then you get into the last couple. The sort of operational one is cross-functional systems and processes that work together like a business runs like a machine.
Yeah.
And the last one is, and I say, don't, work with dicks. Hire A players, hire rock stars, and have a culture which is driven around value.
I love that. So don't hire dicks, hire rock stars.
Yeah, and that's a funny one in its own right, because a lot of businesses that I work with, they've still got their mates in the business, and they might have had people there who were great at the beginning in the journey, but when you go into scale up, sometimes you need to clear out and bring different capability in, and that takes some really tough decisions and good leadership to make that happen. Definitely.
The one just before that point, cross-functional. Could you go over that again? Cross-functional.
Yeah. So what I find is when you're going to scale up, one of the definitions of scale up is the ability to build teams. And so you've got more complexity because, you're going to have more people in the business or associated with the business. So that one's about making sure that everything runs like a machine. So you've got to have systems and processes that work across the various functions in a business. Yeah. So think of it like a set of cogs. If one cog's out of alignment, then the whole thing starts to break.
Yeah.
So my belief is you've got to make sure that you have those that sort of systems methodology in the business so that you understand the handoffs. And again, it kind of links into the last point I said, because if you've got really good, capable, high caliber people,
Yeah.
that actually increases the chance of those systems and those processes working better together.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. I love these points. These are really, really great. Did you say you've written a book?
Not yet.
Not yet. Why not? How many?
Not yet.
What's the word count? What are we on?
Oh, you know what the thing is, right? I got up to about 10,000 words, and then I realized I needed to kind of just simplify it a bit.
And then you switch to podcast.
There's a lot of podcasts going out there. I can talk a lot. No, I want to
You
make.
didn't realize that this was just an accountability session. It's a really elaborate accountability session, Nick.
You know what? I want the book to be practical. I want someone to be able to pick it up. And go, you know what? I can do these things,
Yeah.
and if I do these things with intention and with focus, I'm going to get on the path to fast growth. If that fast growth gets me to building an empire, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to sit down and read a book like this. You know, I'm kind of old school like that. Sometimes I like to pick up a book, write some notes on it, highlight bits, and you know, there's something about it.
Well, I agree. There's a lot of war stories that I'm going to put in it as well, which talks about some of the deals. So, you mentioned before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Because
love
it
that.
will work, right? There's 22
Yeah.
deals I've done over a decade, which gets to that value of $5 billion, but they haven't all been easy. I don't want people to think, oh wow, there's a Midas touch thing here. I've had some disasters in doing the deals. So I want to be able to share those stories as watch outs as well.
Yeah, no, that'd be brilliant. It'd be great to hear about that. You've spoken about many of those war stories in the podcast, or?
Yeah, I tell a lot of them. I talk a lot about the various things. I mean, one of the most popular ones I did a few months back now, probably last year actually, was advice that I would give myself as a 22-year-old, knowing now what I've done. And there's another one that's quite good, which is how to be a really impactful CEO.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of those draw on reflections of me having to go into businesses that need to either transition, turn around, or obviously get into a place of fast growth.
Yeah, right. So what was can you give us a quick summary? What was it what advice would you give your 22-year-old self? I think that's a great question actually for a lot of people.
It was inspired actually by one of my listeners who said, listen, they were in their early 20s and they said, listen, if you were my age, what would you say to yourself? And I can't remember exactly the points I did, but I can, a lot of them are very similar to what we spoke about at the very beginning of this chat today, which is find something you're super passionate about, right? And when you're passionate about something, I honestly believe it doesn't become work anymore.
Yeah.
You just get so engrossed in the topic that becoming really good at it becomes natural because it feels natural.
Yeah.
So one of the pieces was find out what you really love doing, really passionate about, and try and make that sort of vocation also your kind of profession, your income.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like saying follow your dream, follow your passion, but I really do believe that now, looking back in hindsight. One of the other pieces of advice is get mentors, get people around.
This was a question I was going to ask you actually. I'm glad you brought that up. What's been the best sort of courses or mentors apart from Tony Robbins? You're not allowed to say Tony Robbins.
No, well, Tony Robbins.
You're allowed to. You're allowed to. Just joking.
No. Listen, I would never. He has been awesome for what I needed, but I don't sit there and become one of these kind of junkies that says everyone needs to go to Tony Robbins. It is for certain things, right? No, for me, I've always found that if you can work out what you're trying to do first and foremost, that's kind of like the personal vision. So if I've said that I want to have an empire of businesses generating in the hundreds of millions, right? So in order to do that, I need to plot a path backwards. So I need to have milestones. So, what's the first million look like? What does 10 million look like? And then it works from that. And then what I've done is I've said, okay, how am I going to do it? So for me, it's about getting very, very good at this kind of scale up and transition, and 1 + 1 = 3. And then I've gone out there and got people who are doing what I want to do, but are a few steps ahead. And I've paid them to help me accelerate where I am now to being as proficient and effective as they are. And so that to me has been the biggest transition. So there's been a little bit of reading and self-education around that, but it's been getting in a room with someone who's been there and done that and just saying, listen, I want to get from A to B as quickly as possible. You listen to what I'm trying to do and just pull it apart and help me put it back together. Yeah, and that's been by far and away the most impactful thing in my kind of journey around what I'm doing. Brilliant.
Wow. I love that. It's very hard to have a conversation like this and not think visionary. Do you know what I mean? And it's exactly the sort of conversations people should have when they're feeling when they're feeling kind of bogged down with all the small things. And
Oh yeah.
I know a lot of people watching this or listening to this will be struggling with a lot of the reality of what this transition a lot of us are going through right now is. Do you know what I mean? And hopefully listening to this sort of stuff will give you that kind of moment to think long term. You know what I mean? That push to kind of think a bit more about your legacy, about your vision, about what it is you could be achieving.
Yeah, I have a 10-year vision set, right?
10-year vision.
20 years.
20.
And I know.
Do you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah. So one of the things I want to do, and it's kind of inspired a bit by Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm a massive fitness and sport person, and when I'm 65, my sort of birthday present to myself, I want to buy the Boston Celtics.
Oh really? I love this.
Now
this is very Gary V. I love it.
It is, but I heard that and I thought, you know what? When I first heard that, I thought my vision is not big enough, right? And I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
But I thought, here's the thing that jumped into my head. It's not so much about having that much wealth, right? And Ferraris and whatever else and all that sort of stuff. It's about what sort of journey would I need to be on, and who do I need to become? What does my identity need to be like to sign that check?
Yeah.
Now, I even went as far as researching how much it's going to cost, and how much the last sale was, what the valuation is today, and then I'm trying to work out in
20 years. Depends
I know,
on how well they do, right?
Well, yeah, even then, right? You know, there's going to be more wealth in the world and more competition for buying these things. But the point is, like, what impact would I have had to have made on the world to be able to sign that check?
Yeah, totally. And honestly, I love that, because you're not looking at this like wealth generation. You're looking at this like, impact generation. And it's like for you, in order for you to have a business which creates several hundred million a year, you will have to make an enormous amount of value. You'd have to produce an enormous amount of value in the world to generate that sort of return. Do you know what I mean? And I'm guessing that's kind of where your mindset's at with this, right? That's how you.
It's about making a big difference. It's about making a big difference. And I believe, and this kind of comes a little bit about the story I shared with you with my dad, is someone said to me a while back that the cure for cancer could be in some child's head in a poverty-stricken part of the world. And back in 2013, I ran a ultramarathon called Comrades, which is in South Africa. You run the one I did was an uphill run from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, which is 87 kilometers in like 32-degree temperature. And halfway through the run, you run through the World Vision camps where they've got all the orphan children.
Right. Wow.
And I'm almost like I well up every time I remember, because all the kids line up and they're smiling away. They're trying to give you water. They're covered in mud, right? Their parents have either died or they're somewhere else. They're left, right? Like smiling, like trying to, and I'm thinking, what happens if one of those kids could solve a really big thing in the world? But the problem is they're never going to get access to that sort of entrepreneurial mindset and skill set. Because it's just not there. So what I want to do is I want to be able to bring those skills and bring that thinking and bring that kind of belief and all those different things that I've had the privilege of discovering to kids like that, to people in the world who just traditionally have not had access to it.
Yeah.
And that to me is a big mission, right? A big vision. And if I can do that, you know what? If I can then do that, I'm sure I'll be able to sign the check for the Boston Celtics, because that will be a small part of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really,
Amazing. I love that. Tying yourself to a massive vision, and then really going to town on that vision, right? Really having a detailed look at what actually vision is and what it needs, breaking that down, deconstructing it from the future backwards, like you said.
Yeah.
And then looking at those milestones and looking for mentors at each milestone who's done the next milestone, right?
Precisely. And the mentors, you grow out of mentors, and it's quite cool to say that one person who got me to this place is not the person for the next step. Yeah. But I believe that if I can help people create empires, and of course a large percentage of that is going to be investing back into this vision, through a foundation and other different pieces, then I can make a massive difference. So by helping people become successful through this idea of an empire, I can create the empire I'm building, but I can go and make a bigger impact. So that's how it all kind of works.
Brilliant. I love that. That's such good advice. It really is. It really is. I think whenever I've been really detailed on my planning, and it's something I try and do. I tend to really plan things in detail, especially visions in the future, 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 years. probably not prolifically more than 5 years. But certainly after this conversation, I'll certainly look back at that and see if I can think longer term.
It's hard.
What I found is things change so quickly, you know.
It's hard to do. Well, this is the thing. When I work with someone, I say, I actually advise them to have a 5-year vision.
Yeah.
But then we work in annual goals, but then we work in a thing called 90-day cadence. Because again, what a lot of people do is they'll have annual goals, but then they give themselves this kind of idea they've got 12 months to deliver it, but they don't have enough focus and intention. So if you get into a 90-day cadence, then actually achieving the goal becomes inevitable because you're scheduling stuff every day and every week to make that happen.
Yeah.
So it's funny, all of these things become
break the 5 years down into 90 days.
Yeah, you can. Well, why not? And like
okay, so the other challenge around that would be, the industries are still so disrupted right now. How can you really plan 5 years accurately or even semi-accurately when your industry may not be running as it was for another year or two?
Yeah, you do it as this is the difference between, say, annual planning and having a personal vision.
Right.
So I often say that when people come to me, more often than not, they're not really worried about the business. They're worried about what the business is going to give them. So the business is a resource. Yes. So what they really want is freedom.
Yeah.
They want time freedom. They want money freedom. They want the ability to do what they want, when they want, with whomever they want. So I say, create a 5-year vision of that. So what do you want to be doing? Do you want to be on a yacht somewhere? Do you want to be mentoring people? Do you want to have a real estate empire, business for hundreds of millions? What do you want, right? And then we go into annual and say, okay, so what needs to happen this 12 months to progress you on the pathway to that vision? So we don't make it that you have to have it tight, but the 12-month plan is tight, and then the 90-day cadence is almost like prescriptive to hell, like down to what are you doing Monday at 6 a.m. that moves you towards your 12-month goals, which is moving you towards your 5-year vision. And it sounds really crazy, but if you do that and you have the discipline and again the intention around that, it becomes inevitable that you start to achieve those big things.
Brilliant. Nick, absolutely amazing advice, mate. Really, really great. I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy this.
I think I'm mad.
This interview.
This guy, this crazy dude. This is crazy dude.
I've loved it. Really, really amazing contribution. Thank you so much, mate. One thing I was going to ask you is, I know that you do webinars and that sort of stuff, and I know you do them, fairly big webinars for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Hundreds at a time. Is there any way you would be willing to offer, 10 people in our community, an exclusive webinar, which you could take them through this kind of process a little bit more? Is that something you might be able to offer?
Absolutely. I think anyone who, and the caveat is this, right? And this is an important question to put out there. If you really truly have an ambition to build an empire, and based on what I've said today, and you're prepared to kind of really listen and take some advice of what that means, then I'm absolutely happy to serve. Because I think it's a big decision, but if that excites you and you're passionate about it and you can understand the reasons why that's a choice, then yeah, absolutely happy to do that for sure.
Amazing, legend. I'll do a post on the group, and as I do sometimes, guys, when we do a special offer like this, if you write "I'm in," perhaps you will get a shot. You can't write "I'm in" yet, Stuart. You got to wait. I haven't given the official. We haven't officially launched it. Now there's only 9 places left. You got to give me a second, guys.
Always reward somebody who takes action. That's what I say. Reward action. So Stuart's
right. Okay. Do you know what, Stuart? We'll make it a 1-person webinar now. So Stuart's got all the spots. Everyone's like, I want to build an empire. No, I want to build an empire. Okay, cool. Guys, I hope you enjoyed that. Nick, that was absolutely amazing, mate. Really, really appreciate you coming on. What was the name of the podcast one more time?
So Scale Up Your Business. So you can search for that on all the usual channels, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that sort of thing.
Awesome stuff. And if these guys want to connect with you any other way, what's the best way to connect?
Yeah, two other things. I've got the Scale Up Your Business community on Facebook, which is a free resource. There's about 1,500, 2,000 people in the group now, and they kind of just help each other. I joined the group, and a lot of the questions that go into my Monday Night Lives and things like that come from the group. So I encourage you to join that. And if people want to reach out to me directly, the best way to do is just, usually through LinkedIn or through that community. Just message me and stuff like that. And I try and get back to everyone. can't promise it's always straight away with different stuff, but I always get back to everyone as quickly as I possibly can.
Amazing. Nick, thank you so much, mate. Really appreciate you coming on, buddy.
No worries, man. Awesome. Thank you very much. And yeah, always great to chat with you, Seb. Thank you.